So it's now my pleasure to hand off the event to our guests, Caela Carter, our guest of honor with a new book release, as well as Janae Marks, who will be in discussion with Caela. So Caela, I believe you're going to get started, so I'm going to hand off to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Zach, and thanks so much for hosting this. When my last book came out, I did not do any kind of launch because I thought, well, for the next one, I definitely can do something in person, which obviously wasn't true. But still, it's kind of cool because there's people who are here from all over, which is neat and different. And there's able to be some kids here, which is easier over Zoom. So that's kind of exciting. Anyway, so this is my book that came out today. It's called 54 Things Wrong with Gwendolyn Rogers. And I'm going to start by just reading like a little teeny snippet of it. And then Janae and I will have a little chat. And if anybody wants to ask questions to me or to Janae or to us both about writing or this book or books in general, go ahead and put them in the chat. Okay. So this is in chapter 1, but it's not right from the beginning because that would be too easy. And it's the main character's name is Gwendolyn, and she's in the 6th grade, and she's being dropped off. Actually, I think she's in the 5th grade, and she's being dropped off for her first day of school. Nope, I said that wrong. Hold on. This is Gwendolyn. She's in the 5th grade. She's being dropped off at school by her mom, and she has gotten in trouble the day before. In the morning. So it's the morning beginning of the day of school. And it starts with her mom speaking. Now listen to me. You know how to behave, right? Right, I say. Mom is always asking me if I know how to behave, and I do. Like if anyone gave me a test on it, like a math test, I'd get 100%. But I sometimes don't behave anyway. And what I don't know is why I don't behave when I could totally get a 100% on any sort of behaving test. So when adults ask me if I know how to behave, I just say yes. I'd rather think about horses. I spot a purple backpack in the group of students crowding around the school entrance. Tyler, I call. Mom flinches. She'll say she's flinching because I'm being loud, but I know it's also partly because she doesn't want me to love my brother the way I love my brother. He can't hear you, Gwen. The car windows are closed, Mom says. I know, I say. Even though it's April, it's freezing and there's still snow on the ground. That's life in Wisconsin. I'm always asking Mom if we can move to Florida or Arizona, and she thinks it's because I hate the cold, but that's only a little bit of it. It's mostly because I hate losing my gloves at school every day and then having Mom yell at me because my gloves are lost again. I watched a tiny, faraway Tyler run up the school steps and then back down. I open the car door and start to run to him. Gwen, I hear behind me, Gwen. I turn around. Mom is standing outside the car. You forgot something, she says. Oh yeah, I say. I run back and throw my arms around her. A hug. Bye, Mom. That's nice, she says. But I also meant this. She holds up my blue backpack, the one full of all the homework I did yesterday, all the homework we fought about all last night. Oh, I say. Mom sighs and shakes her head, and a little piece of my heart breaks off and falls sharp down my torso and legs, all the way into my heels. I disappointed her again. The disappointment splinter is small this time. It was just one disappointed look. It's small enough that I can ignore it sticking out of my foot as I run across the parking lot towards my brother. But I worry that my heart breaking apart so much is the reason I have trouble being a whole person sometimes. A good person, a person who acts like she would get 100% on a behavior quiz. I wish I could stop disappointing my mom. I wish I could stop getting in trouble. I wish I could be the kind of kid whose mom says yes right away when she asks about horse camp with Tyler or hang out with Hetty. But I'm not that kind of kid. I'm a splinter heart kid. So that's the beginning. There you go. Janae, you're
I had to unmute. I was like, wait. No, that was great. I really enjoyed hearing that. And I also am really excited to be here to chat with you. So I have some questions to start us off. First, since many people usually want to know when they read a new book or when they pick up a new book, how did you come up with this particular idea?
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here also, Janae, especially because it was a last minute kind of thing. So that was fantastic. So this book was different. Almost all my books come from the question, like, what would that be like? And that's sort of how this one started too. So some of my other books, like I wrote a book about the gymnastics trials because I was like, what would it be like to be a gymnast? I wrote a book about a girl escaping a cult because I was like, what would it be like to live in a cult? And this one really started with me thinking about like, what would it be like to have less control over my behavior and where I put my attention and that sort of thing. And once I get that question, I usually like write a scene and then I'm like, wait, I don't know enough about this. And then I stop and research for months, right? And that's what I did with this one too. But as I was researching attention, obviously started learning a little bit about attention deficit disorder or ADHD. And I was like, no, this isn't my character. This isn't my character. This is me. This is me. As I was reading about it, as I was researching the book, I realized like, wait a second, this is how I grew up in school. I grew up totally unable to do, I could pay attention and I could behave. And, you know, my mom's here, so I'll say like, I didn't disappoint her that much, so it became this mix of kind of, you know, really reflecting on what it was like to be such a misunderstood kid, even though it was in different ways, and what it would be like to have those things you can't do. For me, it was more like I couldn't keep an assignment notebook. I couldn't keep track of my homework. I couldn't take notes in school. When those you can't do them is behavior, what would that be like? So that's kind of where this idea came from.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So speaking of research, so like what kind of research did you, just as an aside, what kind of research did you end up doing? Or in general, like what kind of research do you tend to do when you find a new topic?
Yeah. Do you research? Are you a researcher too?
It depends. Like from the Deaths of Zoe Washington, I definitely had to, because I didn't know really much enough about wrongful convictions and that sort of thing.
Right.
But for A Soft Place to Land, I did not need to do as much because it was more of a personal story. And yeah, like it wasn't as many like the outside things happening that I had, you know, so it was like minor things you research here and there, but not huge, broad topics like, yeah.
I tend to think
what you talk about
with writers, we talk about plotters and pantsers, like, which is like, for those of you who aren't writers, plotters are like people who write it with an outline, and pantsers means you fly by the seat of your pants and you just write it. And I kind of think there's a dichotomy among researchers too. Like there's like writers who have to research and there's writers who are like, ooh, I get to research. And I'm way more of the, ooh, I get to research. So yeah, I tend to like be writing one book and then like trying to marinate in a subject for a future book at the same time. And that means like podcasts, blogs, memoirs, documentaries. And I just like, anytime I like to, any kind of way I like to consume content, I start to just like pull in whatever subject I'm kind of learning about before I have really a bigger idea of the plot. Yeah.
I like that because I like, I'm similar. I feel like you don't always realize that there's so many ways to research. You don't always have to read a book or an article. Like I love also like listening to podcasts and finding a documentary about a subject, you know, in addition to reading things about the subject. And I think even kids, like they don't always realize that sometimes research can come in multiple forms.
Yes, and fiction is great because you don't have to cite your sources the same
way.
So
speaking of, you know, writing about topics and researching and deciding to write about topics. So how did you decide to write about, you know, or how was it when you decided to write about, you know, kind of like the realities of living with an undiagnosed disorder? Like, what was it? What was that like? Because you said earlier, you know, you were looking into ADHD and you realized this isn't exactly what I want. So you obviously realized that you wanted her to not necessarily have a diagnosis to start and not necessarily fit so squarely into a box. So what was that like to basically develop her character and what she's dealing with?
Yeah, it was kind of fun. I will say, like, when I first pitched this idea to my agent, I was like, I want to write about an explosive kid who like does things that everybody hates, but like, we're going to like her. And she was like, wait, what? Why would we like her? There has to be like a thing. And I really resisted that because, you know, I agree there has to be a thing, but I don't think we have to know what it is. And that's kind of what I was going for. I taught in a middle school where I had a lot of really hard to understand kids. So I was definitely pulling from that experience a lot. I loved them all, but not everybody did. And, you know, I was pulling a lot from what that would be like. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat. But so it was interesting. And I really didn't want to shy away from the harder stuff about her. So what I had to do was just like get as far into her brain as I could and just really show, it's way easier to like a kid who's like, whatever, running away. If she's telling you the whole time, I don't want to be doing this. Why am I doing this? Why is that foot still going in front of the other, right? Like, this is not the kid I want to be. It becomes a little bit easier and you start to feel for her. So that was, I think that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting because I feel like a lot of, maybe, I don't know so much in middle grade, but definitely in YA, there's always that talk about, like the unlikable characters. And, it's like, I don't know, like, I think that not every character has to be perfect. I mean, I think anybody who's reading a book who gets upset that characters do wrong things, like, I mean, that's kind of the whole point of fiction, is to see characters mess up and how they turn that around. So I think it's interesting that you went in saying like, I want her to make all sorts of mistakes, but I'm still going to find ways to draw the reader in, even if they don't like, you don't have to like her, but you can still empathize with her, hopefully everybody likes her, but you know what I mean? Like, it's not always about creating a likable character. It's about creating a character that even if you don't like everything about them, you can connect with them and empathize with their situation. And what you're saying about that self-awareness a little bit that she has, about, recognizing she's not doing the right things. I think that makes a lot of sense. That would be the thing that kind of helps readers understand, like, oh, she doesn't want to be this way. And I feel like a lot of kids are going to relate to that, because at that age, there is a lot of, making decisions and not realizing why you're doing it and feeling lots of feelings you don't know why. And, so I think it's going to definitely be super relatable to kids.
Yeah. And wait, I want to say another thing about that, about like why she has no diagnosis, because we are doing this at the Writer Center.
Yeah.
And I have to say, part of that is plot, right? Like, it's way easier to write. There was way more content when we didn't have an answer than, this book is about a girl who finds out she has this thing and this is the answer, right? So I really wanted to like, I don't know, to be honest, it was easier plot wise to keep being like, nope, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, to keep the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. So speaking of plotting, so you said you like to, you do like to research sometimes when you're in the middle of another book. So you're starting to think about ideas while you're still writing something else. But when it's time to get started with books, like for this one, did you end up writing an outline, or by that point, do you just kind of, you have it all in your head, all these different research things that you can just start writing a draft without some sort of outline?
I take notes while I research, but then I don't ever look at them.
Well, sometimes I do that too. You write it down, it gets in your head. Exactly. You're like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, rarely I look at them, but otherwise, no, I don't really have an outline. I think I have a sense of I usually have a sense of the ending and the middle, but then usually also that changes anyway. But I usually have a sense of where this could go. And then I get and then I write the beginning upwards of 100 times, the first 25 pages before I can get past that.
Yeah.
I usually have written 3 book lengths of just the first 25 pages before, and you're trying on different points of view and different tenses. And even though I always land in the same one, I've tried them all before that. So yeah, that takes a while. So then by the time I get to page 26, usually have a sense of the middle and the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even if you don't have a full written down outline, you still have in your mind a sense of the arc that you're hoping to go for. And
yeah, the shape, right? The characters,
a general, even if it's not a written down, chapter by chapter thing, you still have a general sense.
Yeah.
You're not going in totally blind. It's you have a good sense of what you're hoping to.
Yeah. It still feels very pantsy, but I definitely don't know what's happening.
No, that's totally fine.
But I do have a sense of the ending. So.
And okay, so speaking of writing process, so how have things changed for this book compared to your previous books? Because this book, as I understand it, was written entirely during the pandemic and your previous books were not. So what was that like, and how has your writing changed as a result of, the lifestyle changes we've all had to, adopt, during this pandemic?
Yeah, that was challenging. So this book, I mean, I wrote that scene, and then because I've been working with my editor for a long, long time, it sold on the scene, which is very weird.
Oh, nice.
So yeah.
Awesome.
So then I was like, well, I have so much time to write this. I'm going to try to write something else. And that wasn't irresponsible because I didn't know a pandemic was coming. That would have been true. So, I tried to like write and sell a chapter book. It didn't sell. And I was in my brain, I was like, all right, March 1st is like, I commit to getting this middle grade done. March 1st, 2020. That's when this is starting. And it did start on March 1st. That commitment started on March 1st, but it was over by like March 13th, right?
Oh, no.
And then, I mean, like that because of the nature of my life with 2 small kids, one of them on online school, and I just couldn't work. I couldn't work. And just being upset, there was no time for months and months and months. And I knew I had this book to write. And it was impossible until about June. I started to write once a week in May, like once a week on Sunday or something I would write. And then in June, I started like waking up at 5 and writing from 5 to 8 and then writing from 8 p.m. to midnight. And anyway, and that was the book. And it was due August 1st. And I wanted to have my writing partner read it first. So I wrote the first draft in about like 5 weeks, really. It was tremendous. I don't know what happens. That's why I didn't know if she was in 5th or 6th grade. No, I'm just kidding. I do know what happens, but
no, but I definitely know what that's like.
Really different. And luckily though, it was almost easier for this one because I did get the marinating time while I was working on that chapter book. Since then, it's continued to be kind of hard because there's no quiet in my day anymore. So there's very little quiet in my day, I should say. So there's not that chance to like marinate in a subject and really like move in on it the way there used to be. I don't know. It's been like sometimes for months I'm like I get up at 5 and then for other, and then like I get into a groove and then one of my kids gets quarantined and we're back to square one. So yeah, it's been really hard. I don't really have a routine the way I did before.
No. I used to have more of a routine and now it's just I write when I can. Honestly, like I've been relying heavily on deadlines from my publisher. Like I feel like when I have a deadline, I get it done. When I'm in between deadlines, and it's just like I have time to do something else. Like I'm not, I have time to maybe think of another project idea, but I'm not doing that. Like that's my so I feel like I'm only being productive when I have to be, which is good because I have deadlines, so that's helpful. But yeah, it's super hard to because you just feel so exhausted when you're working so hard in these conditions that like when you have a break, it's hard to without like another deadline looming. It's been hard for me to find the time because I'm just exhausted. And like, I'm also a parent, you're also trying to just juggle life and it's still stressful. And I used to be able to wake up early pre-pandemic, but now I just feel so tired that like, I can't wake up early. Like that was how I used to do it before the pandemic. I used to always wake up at like 6 a.m. and like right till 7:30. And now it's like, I can't even get myself to wake up, but it has slowly gotten better. So I do feel like,
I think
I'm slowly getting back into, not a routine, but just being more productive. But
there's a content struggle. When I did have time to write this book, I struggled with the book mattering, not because it doesn't matter, but because like the world was broken. Like who cares about this one little kid with ADHD when like, the world is completely broken.
Exactly.
And there's still that sort of like, how do we write in this world? How long is this going to last? At what point are we writing archaic books right now because we're not even addressing the pandemic?
Right. Yeah, I know I was writing a book, the book that just came out also, I was writing during I was revising it during the pandemic. And same thing, I was like, well, for this one, I'm definitely, because at that point it had only just started. We all kind of had, this idea that it might only last a few months. So in my mind, I was like, well, this book for sure is not going to have anything to do with the pandemic. But now you start to wonder, like, should I mention it? Like, should at least, even if you have your book take place in the future, like some television shows are starting to do that, where like maybe last year the show would address COVID. And now this year they're saying like, this show takes place after COVID ends, like they just have that disclaimer in the beginning of the season. You're like, okay. So are we going to be doing that? Yeah. Grey's Anatomy. That's exactly what I was just thinking about. I was saying, I'm like one of those people who still watches Grey's Anatomy. And they were like, this season, we're just going to pretend like it's over. And so like, I wonder if in a lot of books, like people will just start having their, the kid characters be like, remember when we used to have to wear masks, or like last year when we had to be quarantined, like maybe they'll just mention it in the past. Like, because we are slowly getting out of it in some ways, like having more freedoms than we did like a year ago in some ways. So we'll see, but I don't know what to do either.
Yeah, that's it. Like that's freezing me too. The importance, both the importance of it and the logistics of it. Like when do those logistics come into this?
And then in the beginning of the pandemic, I heard that editors didn't want to read about it. Like, so they didn't want to get submissions.
I don't want to write about it either.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, it's hard.
I also think like we're writing for kids this age who went through this. Like,
and the younger kids, like the 8-year-olds probably don't even remember much of life before it. It's like, this is taken over such a big chunk of their lives. So like the younger readers of middle grade, it's like, it's going to feel super unrealistic to never ever mention a mask in some cases, for them. So it's interesting.
Yeah. But that has caused some writer block for me.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So my sort of last topic that I want to bring up before, if anybody has questions they want to add to the chat, is about the family dynamics in the book. So you chose to write some uncommonly talked about family dynamics, like the half-brother relationship. So what made you choose to add that element to the story?
Yeah, that all of my books sort of have that going on. This is one of the things that I'm always like, what is that like? I'm fascinated by the way that adults try to kind of define family for their kids and like tell them that this person's your family and this person isn't, this person is, this person isn't. And even though like as adults, we have different definitions of that, right? We don't all have like the exact, exact same definitions of who exactly is family and who isn't. And so I was especially interested in this for Gwen because I don't think Gwen would understand that. Like she's just, she one of the things that's good about her is that she very much just accepts everybody exactly as who they are. She does the thing that she's wanting other people to do. And so when she has her estranged brother, who she's never met, is in her middle school, and she didn't know that, right? Like that's the thing. And for her, it's just, this is my brother. There's no like complication. Of course, she knows that she doesn't know him, but her mom is focused on like, this is your family of experience and this is a biological family and these distinctions sort of. And so I was really interested in how this would come across to a mind that is so black and white thinking, like, no, this is my brother. That's it. The way you're my mom. And anyway, and I was also interested in this because I've written about step families and adoptive families and estranged parents and that kind of thing. But I was interested in the way that these two are brother and sister, but they're parented completely differently in completely different houses with moms who have completely different definitions of family, right? So they're both being forced into these different definitions from each other too. So yeah, I'm very interested in that, in the way that kids experience family. I think I hear about people's families when I have heart-to-hearts with people way more than I hear about families in fiction. So I'm always really interested in like getting that in there. And, I think we really think about like, were we the oldest? Were we the youngest? What was it like as a kid? And we know how that defines us. And yet like we often don't pay enough attention, especially to parents in middle grade or in.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. I was going to say that like, I feel like in middle grade, there are more stories that are touching upon family. Although I do feel like you're right. Like, I think that's probably changed over time. Like in the past, it was always like, there's going to be absent parents or they don't have both parents or whatever it is. Parents were kind of never really around in a lot of like the classic younger kids books. And definitely in YA, you don't really see them. So I feel like middle grade, a lot of contemporary middle grade now, though, I feel like is starting to incorporate parents and family dynamics into the stories. Like both of my books also have
you do.
Very present families, some, unconventional situations too. So I definitely agree that's interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
One question in the chat so far is, does your son read your books?
Well, he hasn't yet because let's see. I mean, the last time I had a book come out, he was still like just finishing third grade. So like really not in the zone, but I think he'll read this one. I hope he will. It's also an audio. So Elijah, you can listen to it if you prefer. But I also think Like I write really honestly for kids because I think kids are honest about what they're ready to read. So if he doesn't want to read it, you know, he can do it later too. But either way, I'm just glad he's here. So,
Awesome. And what do you think is the appropriate age group for this book? Diane wants to know.
So I'd be interested to know how much you think about this too. When I'm writing, I really don't think about that at all.
Oh yeah.
I just think about the character and then I just try to make every single person like a full whole character, whether they're an adult, a kid, or whatever. And because of that, I do hear a lot that my books are not appropriate for kids. For the kids
because you maybe
I hear that a lot. Yeah, and it's not.
Well, and that's the thing. Is it appropriate because of the subject? Some of the subject matter moments, like
yeah, it's not really content. It's like I often hear it's too intense for kids or something. But like I said, I tend to think kids will gravitate towards, you know, what they're ready for. I don't know that like you should force a kid if they're, you know, to say it's appropriate. I think it's appropriate for any kid who's ready to read it, really, probably
Right.
7, 8 and older. But that doesn't mean it's appropriate for every 8-year-old, because there might be some who are, you know, who are not interested in the content, or or something makes them uncomfortable. I know that my books can make kids uncomfortable, but just because it makes some 8-year-olds uncomfortable doesn't mean there aren't others, you know. So
no,
yeah.
I think that makes sense. I think it's totally true that kids are going to, if something's not right for them, or if they're not ready for something, they'll either just put the book down, or a lot of times they might not even realize, they might just kind of gloss over it in the book and not even realize what they're reading the way that adults do, you know, like, I don't know.
Yeah, if there's
I
like
feel like that seems, yeah, like that's kind of true. Movies,
they just won't read
think
it.
of like, yeah, you think of the cartoon, you know, like those cartoon movies like that have like adult jokes in it nowadays, like because they make it funny for the parents, and like the kids never get those jokes, you know, they just, and like the parents are laughing at the random little joke in the Pixar movie or something, but the kids don't get it. I feel like that could be probably similar to, but I agree. I don't really think about age. I mean, the publisher ends up making those choices, but my protagonist generally around 12 years old. How old is Gwen again? She's a little younger, right? She's
11, but like you said, it changed almost every draft. She was like 10, 11, 12, 11,
Yeah.
10, like back and forth. Because she is, I don't know, the word kept being immature, but she is
Right.
not, she is differently matured than,
Right.
than kids her age. So she wasn't quite easy to like nail down in an age. But yeah, I tend to think just about writing a book, right? And then I think if I make it like very emotionally honest to the main character, and the main character is that age, then it's going to be appropriate for kids around that age.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they say.
Yeah.
Going back to writing advice, that's what they say to do. They say focus less about what your audience is going to be and just about writing the right story, and then you'll figure that out later, or your publisher will help you figure it out, honestly. Okay, so your dad has a question in the chat. How did you decide on 54 things, or did you keep adding things and it wound up to be 54?
No, I don't know how I don't know. I have no idea. That's a good question, Dad. I don't remember when I decided that. That would have been years ago. But I think I definitely just came up with the number 54 because it seemed random. Like it seems like not like 10 or 20, right? And then I definitely had to write the 54 things. Like I had to
so
figure
you
them
thought
out.
of it
the list
before you started writing.
I wrote the whole book, and then I like pulled out what are these 54 things. Some of them, the ones that are big in the plot, I obviously knew. But yeah, and then they also got renumbered, and then even in the very last draft, I still had a repeat, like I had like impulsive twice or something.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it was a big mess.
That is your copy editors.
Yeah. Anyway, it was like, yes. So hopefully that didn't happen. But yeah, the 54. I don't know why I did that to myself. That's a lot of things.
This is a related question since 54 is in the title. Did you come up with the title early on in the process, or did that come after? How do you usually come up with your titles in general? Like, do you have it in your head before you start writing, or is it something that comes out after you write, or is it a mix?
I used to really never have a title, or like I would purposely make a bad title just so I had something to call it. It's funny, my dad wrote for the New York Times when I was growing up. So I remember reading his articles, and he never wrote the headline. So even like as an adult, when I started taking my writing seriously, I just assumed I wouldn't write the title.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't part of my job. Like after I sold my first book, I was like, oh, you want me to write the title? Like, oh, so it's been slow. This one I did, as I said, like I wrote the scene and then I stopped writing it for a long time. And then once I came back after the marinating, that's where the list came from. And then I had the title, like as soon as the list. So it was towards the beginning, but because this was such a short process, that was also towards the end.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question from the chat. What life lessons taught to you by your parents do you bring to your writing process? This is from Michael.
Okay. Life lessons taught to me by my parents. Well, first of all, I'm a writer because of my parents. Like my parents, I'm really lucky that they always treated creative dreams like as important as any other dream. And I just think, that not every parent does that wasn't a thing I really knew until probably I was like a full grown adult that parents would prefer if you say doctor instead of writer, a lot of them. And I understand why, but I think like just the fact that I can pursue this career is because that was not a distinction when I was growing up. And I also think, my parents, something that I really try to do in fiction and in my life is just really intentionally always remember that every person is a person. And I don't think that's how my parents would say it, but I do think that really came from the way I was raised. And it's also just a way that I know I can talk to them still. And, we can kind of grow as a family because I know we have this value of like, we're literally equal. And that equality is not something that just comes naturally. You have to work on it and you have to really be intentional about making sure all people are people to you, sort of. So I think that's a lot of what I tried to do in my books and in my life. Yeah. Michael, whoever you are, that was quite a deep question.
I was going to ask on a similar note, what do you hope that readers will take away from this newest book?
Yeah, I don't,
not like a moral or lesson, but just like, is there anything that you kind of like hope that kids will, take away from it, or what you hope kids will take away from it besides being entertained?
I hope that kids will like, I do hope to bring some doubt to that word unlikable. Like I really set out to write a character who is unlikable, who like in a different version of the story is the villain, right? And unlikable is like the opposite of likable. So it's not just like, I hate that word because it's not just like, I didn't like that character. Unlikable means nobody can like that character. It's impossible to like you, right? That's unlikable. And so I really, really set out to be like, even that person who, is making the whole class stay late because they just couldn't pull it together, has some good things to offer. And, I guess if there is a moral, it's that the onus is on the adults. Really. That's like that we shouldn't be blaming 11-year-olds for not being able to meet unspoken expectations, and instead should be focusing on how to teach them. So, yeah.
Okay, so another question from Celia, or first a statement, the image of the splintered heart is powerful. And then was that imagery, did it come near the beginning or the end of the process?
That was in my first scene that I wrote like years ago before I even thought, I think before I even wrote a book, I just wrote that scene of this book. Yeah. So like years and years and years ago. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, so Greg says, Elijah wants to know who you dedicated the book to.
I dedicated the book to my sunshine, who is Elijah, of course. Because it's so exciting that this is aimed to him. And like I said, this book has been taking years to write. So by the time I have another one, he might be, 42 and not anymore like in the demographic. So that was very, very, very exciting. That, even if he doesn't want to read it, that it's like, it'll be around in his school and his class. And yeah, and not every author gets that overlap, not every author parent gets that overlap. So it's pretty thrilling. Yeah.
That's cool. Can be, the cool kid who's like, look, my mom wrote this, like when he sees his friends walking around with it. Okay, so Kylie wrote, I loved Dr. Nessa, and it was so refreshing to see a provider in a book that really gets it. Can you talk a little bit about how you developed her character?
Sure. I had a lot of trouble with this because I did not want to write a provider that really gets it. Like I had to, because we had to progress the story. But I feel like it's unusual to find one that really gets it. And that's actually helpful, especially when, the first couple ideas don't work. And so, so I really wanted to make her clearly like a hard person to find. I basically put it all in the background, all the other people that Gwendolyn and her mom have tried to see to help them, because I do feel like a lot of books about neurodivergent kids start with like the diagnosis and the kid like accepting the diagnosis, but the provider usually is helpful. And I really wanted to make clear that there are bad providers out there and there are other providers that are good, but only if things are simple. But then once I realized she had to be a good provider, it was pretty easy to develop her character. I just had to keep her like a real, really, really honest person. So I think what happens too when you're somebody like Gwendolyn, or honestly somebody like me, is that you get lied to a lot as a kid, like a lot. I remember teachers telling me like, you have to learn to keep an assignment notebook. As an adult, you'll need this skill. That was a lie. I certainly never needed to keep the assignment notebook the way the teacher wanted me to, right? That was so that the teacher's life would be easier. And it honestly would have been easier for me to figure out how to do it if that teacher had just said, listen, I have 25 kids and I need to be able to check the assignment notebooks quickly. So I need you to do it in this order. That would have been way easier than for them to tell me like, it's for you, it's for you. So that was really important to me that Dr. Nessa is the person who's able to be like, no, that adult did the wrong thing, right? And able to be like, this expectation is reasonable, this one isn't, and just honest with her above, kind of like the way adults sometimes just stick up for each other instead of, just being honest. So, yeah.
I have to imagine that, readers would find that, it's basically just what Kylie said, refreshing to like be able to see an adult person, even if it's a fictional character, just know that there are potentially adults that could model that, and hopefully they'll find that in their own lives if they haven't already, find adults that do that for them. So it could be like, it's like probably a hopeful element if if it's rare, at least it exists, and you're basing it on hopefully some person that does exist out there for kids. Okay, Rebecca and Madison are asking, is it hard to say goodbye to main characters when you're done writing, or do they stay with you? Or did Gwendolyn stay with you?
Oh, that's a really good question. No, because usually I'm really sick of the book. I don't know about you. Like once I get through copy edits, I'm like, I've read this thing so many times. I am ready to throw it out the window. And luckily then there's like a very long break before you have to do this stuff. And by then I like it again.
Right.
But usually like at the end of the writing process, I'm like, it's not the character. It's just like, I'm like, this thing is so boring because I've read it so many times. And then you worry it like actually is really boring. So,
yeah, I think it's like you lose perspective because you're in it so much, you lose perspective and you just can't even tell if it's good. And it's just like,
yeah. You need a break. And you're like, and the comments are all about like this comma is placed in the wrong place and not,
right. So, that's true. Yeah. Okay, so speaking of Gwendolyn, how come that's the character's name? Says asked Noni. How did you come up with her name?
Noni, that's a great question. Noni, by the way, is Elijah's friend. A fantastic question. And it's really funny actually, because one of the ways I wanted to write this book, I actually studied so much about brains. I forgot all about this. So I wanted to write this book and split up the lobes of her brain so that when her brain cracks, when she like really gets angry and she does something she shouldn't, I wanted to show you in columns how one part of her brain is thinking one way and another part of her brain is thinking another way, and another part of her brain is just acting. So like one is angry, one's trying to stop her, and the other's just going, right? That didn't work at all. Nobody could understand at all what I was doing. But because of that, I really wanted a 3-syllable name that like none of them were just a vowel, like a 3-syllable name. So that's how I came up with Gwendolyn. So in those versions, it was Gwen, Doe, and Lynn were the 3 separate parts of her brain. So I don't usually have such an answer for how I come up with, but yeah, that's how it is. And then this is a craft, or like a little tiny craft tip for those of you who are writers. But there's this app called Baby Names, right? That you're supposed to like play with the person you might have a baby with, and you come up with names together by like Tindering them, like you swipe right or left on the name.
Oh,
Yeah, but I do this all the time, just like if I have a few minutes, and then I have a list of names I like, right?
oh, I didn't know about that game.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
I've used baby name websites, but I didn't know there was an app that lets you swipe all things.
Yeah, then you swipe, and then like when I'm stuck on it, I pull up the app, and I'm like, oh, I like this one.
That's smart. That is really interesting. Yeah, I definitely, that is a tip I've used, just the looking at baby names in general. Like if you look up the names that were popular in the year, your character was born, that might give you some ideas, but that makes it even more fun. That's cool. Okay. So Emily wants to know, do lots of your characters have a little bit of you in them, or is Gwendolyn the first one?
Gwendolyn has kind of the most of me for sure, I think, but also they obviously all have a little bit of me. Like I used to say no, that none of them had any of me, but that's impossible now, I know. So I think like there's always things that somebody will point out to me that I didn't even realize were from my life, right? Like, because I'm just writing, right? And so somebody will be like the I don't know if my friend Linda's on here, but the apartment that Gwendolyn lives in is based on the apartment that my friend Linda lived in Wisconsin. But I didn't know that I did that until my husband read the book and was like, oh, this is Linda's apartment, right? And so there's always like those little bits. But in terms of like story and the conflict that Gwendolyn is dealing with versus my other characters, I haven't, like, I didn't grow up in a cult. I didn't grow up in foster care. I didn't like the actual main conflict. This is the first time I've kind of done one that I grapple with myself. Yeah. So.
Okay, so that was the last question from the chat, but if anybody has more, there's still more time. But in the meantime, one question I had was more thinking ahead. So you said earlier that you like to research the next book while you're writing the current one or whatever. Are you currently researching any topic right now that you're willing to share? Or is there anything that you're like randomly interested in now that you're thinking about putting in a story in the future?
Sure. I like this. Like, I'll just give you the topics and not.
Yeah, you don't have to tell us the story. I'm just curious.
Like, great. No, I have another middle grade that I have to write, but I haven't even really discussed with anybody, like my editor or agent, like what that will be about.
Tell us now. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm always working on something else. So I've been working on a YA too. And I've been learning a lot about climate change and invasive species, which has been pretty fun, and snakes. A ton about snakes. I didn't know I was interested in snakes, but it was like a minor part of an idea. And then I started reading books about snakes and got really into them. And that was like the biology of them and the different species, and also like their behavior, and also the way they are used symbolically throughout, in different cultures and religions. And so, yeah, I've been reading a lot about snakes.
Cool.
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other questions in the chat? Okay. Would you consider Celia, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Would you consider making a series about Gwen?
No, I don't think so. I think I once tried a second, and I was just done. Like, I don't know. I was just kind of done with that character. Yeah. So no, and I usually, like, my books don't really end with a nice bow. But I usually kind of like where they ended. So yeah.
Another question from Molly. Is some of the fun of writing diminished when you're doing it on a deadline? That's a good question.
I don't think the writing, like the actual sitting at the computer and moving my fingers that's still really fun. But like the writing life, the life around the writing is definitely less fun when you're on a deadline, because like there isn't the time to like contemplate and marinate in ideas. And also there's like the stress of like, did I get enough words in today? Yeah. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's just more pressure when there's a deadline, because you know that somebody's going to be reading it soon. And so there's like that sense of like, I feel like I overthink, sometimes in a way that is like, you're maybe less free about it. Cause you're like, oh, like, I feel like everything it can't just be like a real first draft. It has to be like a really good first draft. You know what I mean? So you can't just be like super messy. I personally feel like I can't be super messy about it because I want to turn over. So I think
it's like how I feel about it after I'm done with a session and I'm like in the shower going for a run, then like if there's no deadline, I'm like, ooh, what am I going to do? And if there is, I'm like, terrible. Like,
right. You're like, I have to fix this.
Harder,
or you're thinking about word count, things that I hate,
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I'm doing it, doesn't feel any different.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Oh, okay. So a couple more questions came in. So who did your cover art? And actually, that's a good question. So like, how did your cover come out? And in general, like, do you get a chance to chime in when it comes to your cover, or do you just, does your publisher just kind of hand you the cover? Like, how does that work for you?
So I think technically we don't have, I'm looking it up. It's in the acknowledgements. I know her name was Maeve though, which is my daughter's name, the woman who did the cover. But I'm not gonna look at that. Her name was Maeve and she was fantastic. This one, I don't know why they showed me like 4 covers and then like I had a say in it, but that has never happened. This is my 8th book. That has never ever happened to me before. Otherwise it's basic. You can give a note on it. Like, if on my cover for Forever a Long Time, they had, I think it was like the wrong sibling was taller than the sibling who was taller in the book was shorter on the cover, something like that. And so they fixed that. You can give like a little note like that. But in general, I think there was one time I like hated the cover. That was for a paperback cover. And my agent and I argued away to a different one. Otherwise,
they ended up changing it.
Yeah.
That's good. Do they ever ask your opinion before the cover gets, like, do they ever say, like my editor sometimes will be like, what ideas do you have for the cover? They may not even take your ideas, but do they ever ask you?
Oh yeah, they do. I forgot about that. They do usually ask, and they ask about like what the characters look like. And they like, I usually have diverse characters. So they want to get like the race correct on the cover, which is good if they're going to, but usually you have to give like this long list of what everybody looks like. And then there's nobody on the cover sometimes. So yeah, they do sometimes that. Yeah, they do ask about ideas. So I'm not like visual like that. So I don't.
Yeah, I'm always kind of like, you guys know better. Like, I mean, sometimes I'll give them an idea of like, I could see this scene maybe being portrayed. Other than that, it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, exactly. But I will say I love my covers. I love them, especially all my middle grade covers. I've loved every single one. So
middle grade covers though are a special brand of covers. Like I just feel like a lot of times they're illustrated. I just feel like they're just especially pretty. Like YA, it could be hit or miss. It just depends. On what kind of style they're going for. But I feel like with middle grade, it's hard to find a really terrible middle grade cover. Yeah. Okay. So Celia says, you two look like teenagers. How old were you when you published your first book?
I was, when it came out.
I guess so.
I guess I was 31, 32. Yeah.
And I was, my first book only just came out last year. And I'm trying to think, it was in January. You're like, let me do the math. I was 35.
Yeah.
You went to the school also, right?
Yeah.
Your school? Yeah. How is this? So now just going back to that, like, how is your journey like to being published for the first time after graduating from that program? Or like, were you already in the process of it when you were in that program? Because some people I know like go to the program and they are already have an agent or things like that. Like, how did your journey begin, I guess?
I didn't have anything when I went in, but I had a book deal by the end of the first year.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. It just like, once I finally got my act together and was like, this is what I want to do with my life. Why am I doing all these other things? Then it just happened. So yeah. I don't know. I worked like crazy, but I know it's also annoying. A lot of people work like crazy and don't get.
No, I mean, I feel like it's a combination of all sorts of things.
Exactly.
Both within and without of your control. I'm on the other end of the spectrum. I went to the program with nothing. I did not know anything. I went to that program right after college. And so I just didn't even know anything about, 2 years after college. Like, so it was like, I didn't have any experience with anything. And so I, as a result, needed a lot more time after graduating before I ended up getting a book deal and stuff.
Stories in you. That makes a lot of sense. I don't know how like the young authors do it. Like,
yeah, I was like, I don't know anything. Like, I'm still figuring this. I had never written a novel. I barely wrote more than short stories. Like, so I just felt like I was such a newbie at that point that it kind of made sense looking back that I was not going to be in that position. But yeah, that's cool. Any other questions?
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, this was
questions and for being
very
here.
exciting. And
everyone who is here. So forgive me if I don't know.
Well, is there like, so for people who want to buy copies of your book, in addition to bookshop.org, is there like a favorite indie that you like in your area?
The link on our invite, it just says bookshop, but it actually is the bookshop connected to my favorite indie.
Okay.
So, which is it's called Cups and Books, or Books and Cups and Books, and it's brand new. It's in my neighborhood, and it's like
fun.
Neighborhood locals in Flatbush, Brooklyn, who just opened a bookshop after like years of doing other things. It's this great couple. Yes, and they didn't. I don't know if they're here, but I couldn't find them on email, so I actually just walked into the store and was like, "Would you mind if I put this link up to our books on your, on your bookshop?" And they and I give them your info too, Janae. So
awesome. Yeah. So everybody support the indie bookstore.
Obviously, buy it wherever, buy it at your local indie, or but also that is the indie of my heart right now. So it's Cups and Books. Yeah.
Great. And you're getting a lot of congrats and thank yous in the chat. So so that's it. Unless you have anything else you want to add.
It's so great to see everybody. And later I got to find out who all was here. This is so exciting.